I graduated in 2004. As Dino explained, I graduated in 2004. Then I just received my Bachelor of Science in 2017. So between 2004 to 2017, there have been a lot of changes in those 13 years. And I applaud NTID for that. I wanted to find a picture of myself when I was a young student here at NTID, but I am so grateful there was no Facebook back then. I grew up in Iowa. My family was hearing, and there was few deaf people around. My family kind of signed. It wasn't their fault, but I grew up. I didn't really learn sign language. It was very rudimentary. I took everything in visually, and my family tried to sign. They tried to have me in speech therapy. Let me show you a picture. When I was 2 years old, I contracted spinal meningitis at age 2. And it was a very deadly virus, and I considered myself lucky, only become deaf from that. And as I was growing up, my parents only did home signs with me, and gestures and baby signs. And that's how we learned. And later, I learned C, sign exact English. Say, for example, what is your sign for the word fine? Fine, fine. Or fine with the letter F on chest. What about the word for home? Home, all right, home. But we used home as looking more like table. But that was out in the Midwest. You really couldn't blame my family for that. Here's an image of a truck. That was in the 1990s. I had received my cochlear implant, but it didn't work for me. For some people, the cochlear implant works well, but it didn't work for me. I accepted the silent world. I accepted that would be my life. And over the years, my parents tried to convince me to wear my cochlear implant, and I said no. I was satisfied with who I am. I was fine with being deaf. That's who I am as I grew up. It was a struggle with how to communicate with hearing people. I could speak, but I could not speak well. I would communicate back and forth, but one-on-one it was okay. And I was involved in sports, tennis, skateboarding, wrestling. It was a small community out in the Midwest, and everything was basically the same. We didn't have soccer. I didn't understand that game. Here's a picture of the truck. I understood struggling with other hearing people communicating, but when I saw the truck, this low rider, that was about 1994, That was fascinating to me. I would watch people. It's like watching NASCAR, though, how people would go around a track in a circle. That was boring, but actually seeing a lowrider down on the street and how people changed their trucks, that was fascinating. I met many people, and that helped me to communicate with them, to gesture and use body language for communicating. This truck was fascinating. Motorcycles were fascinating. Other automobiles were fascinating. There were two people who were very influential in my life when I was a young child. This man on your right, this was my grandfather. His name was Bud. He was my mother's father. He was a machinist, and he did well. He did not know sign language. He would come, and whenever I would stay over at my grandfather's house, there was always soda at the bar. Normally I didn't have soda, but every now and then, no. His shop was a few houses down from his home, so it was in walking distance, and I would walk to the shop with him. One time he made a cannon, a small cannon. When I was young, I'd ask him, gesture to him, "What does this do?" He picked up a small golf ball, gave it to me, and told me to pull it into the barrel and then to pull the trigger. I didn't understand what he meant by that. My mom came by and explained it to me, and I thought that was pretty cool. The next trip back to my grandfather's, he had the cannon ready for me. He had said it's out in the middle of the street. The cannon was set in the street, and he told me to plug my ears or to go into the house. And I told him I didn't want to go into the house. I couldn't hear anything anyways. And that's when he realized, okay. Then he allowed me to pull the trigger. And I pulled the trigger, and the golf ball flew out to almost 4 miles. Imagine, 4 miles. That was pretty cool. I liked that. That was something I could learn, kind of thing. I learned how he made it and how to be successful at that. That was really attractive to me. This other man, his name is Tom Steins. I met him through a friend in high school. His son was in one of my classes. He knew sign language better than I did. But I met his father. They kind of talked back and forth. His father had lost his hearing during the Vietnam War. He had lost his leg also, but that did not stop him. He had confidence. He had gone through so many things. And he was a great influence to me. I have thanked him for his influence. And also, he was very good with his hands. He made jewelry, watches. He fixed everything, very tiny pieces. As you can see here, he made small pieces. I couldn't see them. Maybe I could see them now with glasses, but they were so small. Let me explain about my sports. Volleyball, basketball, lacrosse. I wasn't good at those sports. Tennis, that was my sport. I made it all state. There was one thing about me while growing up. My battle with hearing people was trying to communicate with them. I needed to be able to express myself, put myself out there, have confidence in myself, to believe in myself. That wasn't really an issue, but people would see me as the handicapped player. But that wasn't my way. This here, net zero, like in bowling, you have the handicap of 0. That's awful. In tennis, the handicap of net 0, that was an awful label. Don't be confused. Then in high school, I was frustrated with the hearing people and hearing world. And that was high school. Understand that in high school, I was not comfortable with the interpreters in the classrooms. They had to speak for me. That was embarrassing. When they spoke for me, I had to depend on someone from across the room to speak for me. I thought I could do better myself with my own speech. Growing up, I was speech reading from the age of 4, so I would speech read everyone. That's how I depended on communication. That's what I needed to do. That was my way of communicating with hearing people and understanding them. I didn't limit myself. What I meant was, here's one example. If you have 2 people, person A on my left, person B on my right, person A I would try to, let me see if I can explain the difference to you. And then you tell me whom you think would be more successful in getting ahead in life. I would go up to a person and say, "Oh, no, I don't understand what you're saying. I'm deaf. What's going on?" That's communicating with person A. Communicating with person B would be to say, "One moment, I'm deaf, but here's my phone. Let's text back and forth and show you what I mean." It's like writing back and forth, and that person B, would get along better in the future. And I see that you all, if you were person A, how would you get along in college? But that is an example of how you would communicate. And that worked for me. I needed to always do that, not to just sit back and be passive. I would have to do the work myself. I knew myself better than that. To be very disciplined, they have to force me to step up. I would always have to depend on myself, not limit myself. And you should not limit yourselves, whether you're deaf or hard of hearing. Don't let anything block you. Just go ahead and do it. What can you say? Just do it. That cannot hurt. Up here, college life. After high school, what do you think? My grades in high school, what do you think my grades were like in high school? That perhaps I was a C average student, a regular average student? Yeah, I was an average student. Honestly, I didn't get good grades. My parents figured after high school, if I were to go to college, I would go to the local community college. They wouldn't let me sit home after high school. And I thought, college? Why would I go to college? I could go to work. And they said, go to college for 1 year. And I agreed. I went to the community college, and the services there, they were difficult. There was really no access. The interpreters would not show up, and those who did signed worse than I did. I did not understand them. I couldn't communicate with them. I couldn't get along with them. And the teachers in the community college, they were just talking heads. And they would put you to sleep. And they would also talk to the chalkboard as they were talking, writing. I couldn't depend on the interpreters. They would sit over there and try to lip read me. And if I were in a mood, I would struggle with them. My grades were average, and my parents were okay with that. But there was something I wanted to do. And my father asked me, what did I want to do? I thought, well, maybe I should move. I checked online on the internet, and remember back in those days, the internet was lousy. They had the AOL 2.0, and dial-up was so slow. Put in your input, and you'd have to wait for 2 minutes for the page to load. Go to another page, and it would take another 2 minutes for the page to load. The speed was slow. And today, everything's instantaneous. You all are very lucky. But for me at that time, research was very slow. And then to research deaf access, it was a long weekend of research. But finally, if a page were to come on up, if it were the wrong page, I'd have to reload the page, and it took forever. And if you lost connection, that you'd have to start over. Research on the internet at that time was not good. So don't take your technology for granted. The colleges that I found were CSUN, Gallaudet, and RIT. And I was curious about New York. I had never been out of Iowa. I would have been like a duck out of water. I was a farm boy. I didn't know anything. But I needed to get out into the world. I did research, and I thought RIT was a good fit for me. My father wanted to see the evidence, to know the facts, to find out why I wanted to go. And I did ask him. And we had to ask my mother. He said he couldn't just decide. And he did look at the paperwork, called over my mother. My mother came on over, looked at the application. My father said, "Look at what your son did." And she asked what that was. That was a way for me to get out of here. I had gone to the 1 year of community college that they asked me to go to. I wanted to try RIT. And they agreed. And I loved it. It was probably one of my best weeks ever. My parents and I drove to NTID. People were upset with my decision, but it was whatever made me happy. My mom had no idea of the location here. When we arrived to NTID, here to Tower A, just out front here, when I came in, there was a line of students waving, applauding me in. And that was how I started my life here. This became my home. And people signed all over the place. You saw hands gesturing and signs flying around. I couldn't believe that. This was my first time I arrived here, and this is how people welcomed me. And I wasn't shy. This is how I went up to people. I signed, "My name is M-A-R-K. Yeah, K, Mark. That's how I signed back then. I did not know ASL at the time. I was the duck out of water. My parents were like, "Hey, is everything okay?" And I looked at my parents and I said, "Yeah, everything's cool." Then I took off in another direction, kind of dismissed my parents. My parents went off on their own. I don't know if they were upset with me. They went off on their own. When I arrived back to my dorm room, I saw a note, and it was kind of, oops. I kind of didn't feel guilty, though. They didn't blame me. So I majored in CIMT, Computer Integrated Machining Technology. And I loved it. The faculty at that time was David Caldwell. This is his sign name, DC. He pulled me into the program. He was a very nice man, brilliant man. Over the years, we had become good friends. He mentored me, and I'm very thankful to him for that. He taught me a lot in the program. He was awesome. He was a great teacher. Right now, he's teaching in New York University. And David was an awesome person. I started with him my first year. He taught me so many things, so many hands-on things. And I did well, and I liked that. Another teacher here, Ed, who's back here, Ed Schwartz. He also taught me during my third year here in the program. He's a good guy. He taught me to think outside the box. I struggled for a while, and he showed me different ways of doing things, how to think outside of the box. From there on, I took off. That was my third year. And that's when I became more fascinated in the CIMT program. Thank you, Ed. And another person, Dr. Sid McQuay. He'd been here many years in the CIMT program. So wherever he is now, the new faculty now, the program has improved from 2004 to 2017. Back in the old days, things had changed. The technology has changed. And the faculty have changed to keep up with the technology. And I applaud NTID for doing that. That's not easy to do. And Sid, he's off on his sailboat somewhere. I thank you, Sid. One moment. I want to show you a video. Oh, let's forget the video. It's not coming up. I wanted to show you a video of how to become a machinist, the life of a machinist. You would draw the device, then would hand it off to me. I would input that into the software. The designs then would be uploaded to the machine, the CNC machine, the computer numerical control machines, CNC. All the codes would be transferred to make the parts. Designs would be cut out from the machines, and that's what I did. That was my work. Was ready for the real world experience. I had to do co-op to satisfy my degree, 2 co-ops. The first co-op was at Radford Precision Tool, Inc. And then the other co-op, they were different as night and day. I spoke with the vice president. In the first week, I went into the co-op. I had my portfolio. I showed it to my interviewer. And he just glanced at it. He didn't really honestly want to deal with me. He never interacted with a deaf person. I had a difficult time communicating with him. I was willing to write back and forth. And he put up with that. We wrote back and forth. He wanted me to leave, and I said no. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to learn. I needed to learn for my graduation. I'd be willing to work for free because I needed to gain the experience. And he said, well, why not? Let's give it a try. But it was important experience for me to try. I had to step up. So when I worked in that company for the 10 weeks, the first 9 weeks on the job, imagine how I learned. I would just look over the shoulder of one of the other employees. The employee would try to explain. He would just kind of wave me off, talk to other people, basically have me stand over his shoulder, not talk to me, just say, stay in my place. I didn't learn anything. And it was like, is that how I'm supposed to learn for the first 9 weeks? I went back 6th week to speak with the vice presidents, and I said, I want to have hands-on experience. And they said no. And I asked, how am I supposed to learn? You have hearing people out there on the floor. How are they learning? And I said, you don't know anything about deaf culture or anything. You need to let me get some hands-on experience. And he said, no, you cannot hear. And that was frustrating, and I was simmering. And I said, why don't you let me have my hands on the machines and work with them, please, just for the 1 week? And he still told me no. It's fine. I went to other workers, asking kind of how they felt, how they struggled to get through and learn, and how to work with the tools. So during the last week, they figured what could go wrong. So honestly, in the last 2 days, I learned the machines. I learned all the equipment that it took hearing people 6 weeks to learn. I learned in 2 days. I learned the tools. What took hearing people 6 weeks to learn, it took me 2 days. I did it. I don't know how, but I did it. They just basically, they would have told me to push the button, and then they would tell me to, no, push another button, go over there and push that button. That's what people had to do, is just push buttons on another machine. And one machine wasn't set up. They told me to push another button, so I'd go to push a button. Things were fouled up, but that's what they told me to do. They had to be more clear, more specific. In the hearing world, it's vague. But on the last day, I went in and I shook their hands and I said, thank you for the experience. And they looked at me and said, did I have a good experience? And I said, yes, I learned everything in the past 2 days thanks to you. And that confused them. That was out in the Midwest, that job. The second co-op was at Kodak. The first day I went in for my interview, I showed up at the job. I didn't know how I'd get through. I knew I would. I went. I was waiting for the interviewer. He came in, and he was talking, and I thought to myself, okay, what's the worst that could happen? Just accept it. The gentleman came in. Oh, he signed, hello, my name is Jeff. How are you? And I thought to myself, awesome. Here's a person who can sign, someone with whom I can communicate. I was so surprised and so happy. Dennis Hobbs, this was his sign name, because he was balding. So I was so grateful to that. And it was the first week. It was great. I was very motivated. Jeff Garlinghouse was one of the few people at Kodak with whom I worked. You know, understand, Kodak hired deaf people, so communication throughout the organization, they were comfortable with deaf people. And it was important that I was there. This was so different than from home. I was so grateful to Jeff. I'm so grateful to everything he did. And he was a great guy. I finished with my co-op experience and graduated with my degree in CIMT. I later went on for a degree in manufacturing technology, but that took years later. I had lost my motivation. It took 3 to 4 years to get my associate's degree, and I was basically done with school, worn out. I wanted to go find a job. I flew out to the West Coast. With an opportunity to interview with West Coast Choppers, WCC. I applied, went out for an interview, came back to Rochester. It was at the end of the school year. I had received an email, a text, and I thought it was a joke. I was having lunch with my friends. We were seated around a table, and I had excused myself to go to the bathroom, to go number 2. And so I'm in the bathroom. I'd received text while I was in there, and they had made an offer. West Coast Choppers made an offer. And here I am, sitting in the bathroom, receiving this job offer. I thought maybe someone was making a joke. I don't know. It turned out to be a real job offer. I showed my friends that I was offered the job. I knew I was packing, went off to California, and started working for West Coast Choppers. And here's a picture of the motorcycles I made. And this is not to be confused with Orange County Choppers in upstate New York. It's just 4 hours south of here. West Coast Choppers is in California, so just keep that in mind. Here's a picture of the shop where we made our motorcycles. These were the top motorcycles. They were called choppers. They had long front forks that were angled. Hot rod motorcycles. Not the regular motorcycles. These were more low riders. Do you think they're ugly? I kind of agree. Some of them can be ugly. These are some of the designs and some of the people for whom we built. One person was Vince McMahon, the owner of the World Wrestling Entertainment, World Wrestling Foundation. That's his motorcycle. This is one of the wrestlers. We were invited to build one for him. And I helped build by making the parts that go into the motorcycle. This is one of my favorite motorcycles. This started in 2000. So we started constructing this. It's beautiful. My relationship with West Coast Choppers was a machinist, Dan Kanzler. Dan Kanzler, Kanzler. Again, Kanzler. I want to make sure the spelling's right. He was a great homeboy. I respect the heck out of him. He taught me so much at West Coast Choppers. He made me who I am today. I remember the first day I went into work at 6 in the morning. It was more like 3 in the morning. Tried to teach me how to work with things. He invited me on in. He didn't care that I was deaf. It didn't matter. There was no problem. He came in, explained things to me. I learned so much. After the 6 months, I started working on my own. Basically, I'd learned everything I needed to know. He taught me by example. He taught me how to communicate with the machines. He taught me how to communicate with the cutting tools. We closed the door, and I couldn't necessarily see or hear anything when the doors were closed on the machine. Hearing people did not have to listen to the machine. They could just hear it. But me, I would have to listen to it. And Dan taught me tips on how to work with the machines. For example, consider music. You can feel the beat in the music. Boom, boom, boom. And that's kind of how machines ran too. They had a rhythm as they were going about their machining work. It took time to learn how the tools sounded. You had to understand how the tools sounded like, what a tool breaking sounded like when other people would go off to lunch. Maybe something would sound bad during lunchtime. You come back, you realize something was off with the machine, and you'd push the button to turn the machine off. And that's happened to me. And they asked me, what was going on. It's like the machine broke. And they had to teach me how to work with the machine. They had to teach me. And another example was coolant. They used water on the tools, on the drill parts, to keep parts from overheating while they were being tooled. And you could see the coolant, the vibration. And it seemed fine if the vibration was calm. The machine was doing what it should be doing. If you recall Jurassic Park, the movie Jurassic Park, when the dinosaur would thump along, you'd see water puddles shake. That was indicating that the machine was not working well if it was overly vibrating. One guy who was up in the walkway, he was working on the front forks up in the walkway. I was down on the floor. I had 4 machines. And the guy up on the walkway, he was working and playing, but he would turn on a tool, and it sounded like an airplane, not a truck. It sounded like an airplane. He'd turn on one of the machines, and then he'd turn on another machine. I'd have to go push a button on another machine. The machines would sound off. And why would the machines sound off? I didn't understand that. I would look at all the machines, and I thought, I turned all the machines off, but they seemed to be starting up again. And I felt like echoes. My sense of vibration was pretty strong. I was pretty sensitive to it. I didn't understand what was going on. Dan came on in, and he asked, what's going on with the machine being off? And I said, I thought everything was fine. I pushed the button, which started up with the machine again. It ran okay. Then I heard another machine start up. And I went to go push a button on the first machine off. It turned out to be was the guy up in the catwalk had a remote, and he was turning on the machines for me. He was messing with me. He was trying to teach me how to feel the differences in the machines, different types of machines, and how they're starting up. I kind of accepted that. That was a learning experience. But I had to thank Dan every day for helping me out there. Another thing they taught me was how to be successful. It took me 11 years to figure that out. It took me almost 11 years to figure out the concept of RPMs. If you run a machine at full bore, at full RPMs, say 1,000 RPMs, if you run it full out, you think the machine's running well. It's loud, though, and you think something's wrong. You have to take care. You have to calculate the work. I couldn't figure out what was going on with the machines. And Dan said, oh, the work, you have to figure things out. You can't run it overloading the machines. You have to reduce the RPM on a machine, and it'll sound a lot better. That was something I had to learn. And one other thing, here, if I needed to call tech support, or today you'd use your phone, you just call them up and call. You could use a video phone to communicate with tech support. Back then, I had the old sidekick. Remember what the old sidekick was like? The old little flippy sidekick? That's what we had for phones. I had an old slide. And with tech support, I could not communicate with them. So the shop supervisor asked me what we could do to figure that out, how to communicate with tech support. We figured that we would text back and forth, and then it was decided, why don't we come up with a video to show how to troubleshoot any problems? Do that instead of me having to call tech support anytime. And we could put that up on YouTube. So anytime I had a problem with a machine, I would call it up on YouTube, and I would learn from that. That was a great use of technology 10 years ago. And my company was instrumental with that. And then captioning came in, and you could learn from the YouTube videos. You can see, if you have a view of something, you have the long view, your destination. That's your destination, and you're looking in from the outside. You don't look from the inside out. So the quote goes as, "One's destination is never a place, but a new way of seeing things," by Henry Miller. You need to make a decision of where you want to go. Just go ahead and do it. Gain that experience. That's how you'll learn from it. Another job I had was a difficult job. It was in Chicago. It was with Warmerlin Precision Products. They were in the aerospace industry, making products for Boeing and the military. It was a difficult place to work for me. When I entered, it was immediately difficult. They realized I was deaf, and they didn't think I could work on the machines. I would try to explain to them that I could. They wanted me out, and I refused to leave. I said I would accept low pay. And they agreed and let me stay. For 6 months, it was a struggle in the company. Sean Sultan, he was my supervisor, my trainer. He would train me different things. He would try to teach me and then leave me on my own for 6 months. After 6 months, he would try to test me. He tested me on night shift. Once I proved myself, I went back to day shift. At night shift, I learned the programs. I learned the 5-axis machining, and that's a very complicated machine. Most people are proficient in 3 or 4 axes, but I learned to work the 5-axis machine. And I showed Sean that I could do it. And I also worked on many side jobs because I did want to learn. I wanted to learn technology. I didn't want to be dismissed. I learned different machines. And they didn't realize I could do things. They figured no way, but I gained the experience, and that was a benefit to me. I stepped up. I went ahead and learned what I needed for my job. It was a struggle to go back and forth to learn things, but I didn't give up. I kept on. I kept doing it. So I drove forward. I did not give up. I did not give up. Don't give up on your dreams. And then I decided it was time for me to come back home to Rochester. Iowa is no longer my home. I consider Rochester my home. California was a great place. I gained great experience out there. It was very positive influences out there. On my journey, I wouldn't let things block my way. You needed to chase your dreams, but always know the road that'll lead you home again. I needed to keep an open mind, remember to gain access to everything, and I needed a job. And I also considered the idea of helping people as people helped me, and to keep in touch with people, maintain your network. Culture, deaf culture is important. Have a can-do attitude, and Rochester's my home. And I also decided to come back to RIT for my bachelor's degree in manufacturing technology. I graduated in 2017, just recently. I tell you, it's tough to come back to school. I left, in 2004, and I came back in 2013, and I'm 32 years old. Thank you. All right. Thank you for your applause. Here's one of my success stories. These two items. This on the right, I built this when I was with West Coast Choppers. They believed that I could do this, and they allowed me to do this. They signed me to work with research and development. I worked with a team, came up with a new frame and a new design. Part of that design became my new motorcycle here on the left. You can see the tubes of the front fork. Definitely different. They were radically different. They gave me the design. What was I supposed to do with that? It was complicated. It took me 5 months to figure it out. We started with a large piece of sheet metal. We had a folder. We cut out the piece. They gave me the folding machine, the bending machine. We would bend the particular sheet to the appropriate angles and form, and it became one of the parts. It was an evolutionary design. It was a CF2 design. It was more boxy looking. 27 parts to it. That's a surprise to me, but it was hard to construct. It took a lot of work. And naturally, this is my baby. This is what I built at West Coast Choppers. You all can look at it. There are a lot of parts in that motorcycle, the tube, the construction. I had a great time working and building this, but it was a lot of work. I didn't understand a lot on how to build it, so I got a lot of help. It took a lot of back and forth trying to get this built. It was 3 months, about 70 parts to make this. And the tubes, the front forks, the paint job. Of course, there was a waiting list for a lot of the parts, which took a long time to come in. You can all look at my motorcycle, but please do not touch it. Pictures are fine. That's fine with me. But please do not touch it. That's all I ask. It was just one last component that needed to be added to it. Now I work up in Webster. East Side Manufacturing, Inc. Craig is my manager, and he's here. Hi to Craig. Thank you for coming this evening. Craig Gertner, thank you. I think I've been there for the last 3 years, and he's taught me quite a bit. He's a very patient person. And he's very, very smart. And I look forward to working with him. Thank you so much for coming this evening. Thank you.